So very good afternoon to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, welcome you to the third lecture of the series we are taking on the topic Literary Theory Post-World War II. As we have seen in the first and second lectures, we have discussed mainly about the idea of literary theory, idea of literary criticism, what is literature, and we got a basic idea regarding the various literary theories which we are going to discuss in this series of lectures which we are going to take. On the screen, you can see my details, and you can also find the channel of mine wherein you can connect with me after the lecture gets over. During the lecture, if you have any doubts, you can write it in the chat box so that we can have a discussion regarding the same. Now, today, as I said, is the lecture 3 or third lecture which we are going to take up. And it is a continuation of lectures 1, 2 with the topics which we have discussed. So, specifically related to specific topics, we have discussed new criticism, we have discussed Russian formalism and formalism in general, and then we started structuralism. So today we will start with structuralism, discussing the important points, moving on to the other theories which follow structuralism. Right. Now, the main topic which we were discussing, or the lecture, the previous lecture came to an end with the idea of structuralism, and there we had discussed the theories of this linguist, as you can see before you on the screen, Ferdinand de Saussure. And the points which we have discussed, amongst them the important things which you need to keep note of are that language is a system of signs, and the signs are arbitrary. Arbitrary means there is no particular rational reason for assigning the meaning to the signs. Each sign in the system has meaning only by virtue of its difference from others. So what gives meaning to a particular sign? The meaning is given by the difference which it has from the other signs in that system. Now, each part is significant only as it relates to others in the total structure, with nothing meaningful by itself. So the idea is that everything is in relation to another thing. Now, there is this concept of binary oppositions. Binary का मतलब क्या है? Opposition का मतलब क्या है? Whenever we are saying binary, the idea comes that two things are there. Oppositions means what? Things which are opposite in nature, right? So, when we are thinking about binary oppositions, here are some examples, जैसे up, down, good, evil. So this is how we get the meaning of this idea. So what is up? Up is something which is not down, which is opposite to down. What is good? Good is the opposite of evil, right? So this is how structuralism and the theory of Ferdinand de Saussure spoke about signs and how binary oppositions and the fact that difference to others gave meaning to a particular sign. We discussed the concept of signifier and signified, and it is very important for us to understand the concept. So what is signifier? Signifier is the sound image or the written shape, and signified is the concept which is indicated by the signifier. For example, if we say cat, we agree this is what we call that animal that fits into our concept of cat. Thus, when we are saying cat, the word cat is bringing the image of a cat in our mind. There is no scientific reason why we are calling it a cat, but it is how this particular concept of cat is there in our mind. So we see that the concept is something which is arbitrary. That is, there is no logical reasoning behind why we call a cat a cat. We are calling it because this is how has been the convention of calling that particular thing. So the concept of the cat gets the name of the cat by the reason of convention by the fact that we call a cat and a cat is not a dog. So this is how the relation is there, but they are animals. So this is what Sashor tried to say. So language pre-exists us, that is, it is there before us, it speaks us, and the self is created by language. So our identity, self, is created by language. They ask, who? The structuralist critics, that what makes a story, what qualities does it have that cause it to fit into that category? So why or what is the reason why we are calling a story a story? So individual texts, if we take up, they are mainly used to exemplify general characteristics of literature as a whole. And just as a language has a grammar, poems and stories also have grammar. So they are kind of making us think about the structure of the different genres which we have. In contrast to formalism, formalism is referring to what we did before studying structuralism, wherein we spoke about Russian formalism, French formalism. So structuralism suggests there is no literary language, just a system of signs that are a part of the culture. So formalism, what were they doing? Formalism were talking about the form. They were talking about the literary language, the form, the way plot and story was done. However, in structuralism, they are saying that there is no literary language as such. All texts are worthy of consideration, and formalism was mainly trying to judge the quality of literature through the form it had. What is the underlying structural system is what is important for structuralists. What is the meaning, what is the structure, and how do we make sense of the text through that? Now there are some other critics, there are certain other theorists like Lévi-Strauss, Lacan, Foucault, Barthes, Derrida, who can be studied in relation to structuralism. And then the idea of Roland Barthes, who says that the idea of death of the author, that is, the author is merely the channel through which language, which is deeply structured, speaks. So according to him, once the text is written, it is completely the idea of the writer to interpret that text based on the text which is there. We can also refer to Northrop Frye, who states that literature works by a system of objective laws. Criticism can formulate and implement those laws, and he saw, this is important, 4 narrative categories, providing structure for all categories of literature, that is comic, romantic, tragic, and ironic. So this is what Northrop Frye wanted to say. This is an example, a poem by Lewis Carroll, which is termed as Jabberwocky. And the structuralists, they studied, if as a structuralist, you yourself is studying this poem, what question should come to your mind? First is, what makes this poem, or what is the main idea of this poem? How is each part significant in relation to other parts? How do we make sense of this text, even with the coined words? What does this myth reveal about human consciousness? So this is just an example. You can take up any text as such and try to do a structuralist analysis of that. And then you can kind of find out how that particular work, whether it's a poem or a prose or a drama, how each part is related to other part, what kind of sense we are making of the words which are there. Is there any particular myth, any particular idea which is given in this poem? We can discuss in this way. Another concept which we just discussed in the very first slide, that a major theory associated with structuralism was of binary oppositions. What is binary opposition? The two things, that is a pair, which could give you idea of two images, ideas which are opposite in nature. For example, male, female, speech, writing, rational, emotional. So this concept plays an important role over here. And when we take up post-structuralism, this theory this idea becomes important, because the post-structuralists actually try to dismantle this kind of proposition which is given by the structuralists. That is why we just quickly discussed a few points of structuralism, because today we are going to start in details post-structuralism, and we are going to discuss the ideas which are there in post-structuralism. But since post-structuralism started as a reaction to structuralism, that is why the basic ideas which we just discussed, we needed to actually refer to them. So good afternoon to all of you. I can see a few of them have joined, like Sheikh Fareen, Cherry, Swapnil. So very good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Please be there with me as we proceed. So post-structuralism, we will be discussing the concept now. So it may be understood as a critical response to the basic assumptions of structuralism. We have discussed structuralism in details in the previous lecture. You can go through lecture number 2 for further details. So it is, as we said, is a critical response to the basic assumptions of structuralism. What was structuralism? It was a fashionable movement in France in 1950s and 60s that studied what underlying structures inherent in the cultural products such as texts and utilizes analytical concepts from linguistics, psychology, anthropology, and other fields to understand and interpret those structures. So first, they would identify the structures which are there in that text, and after that, using all these different fields of study, they would kind of analyze those structures for a better understanding of that particular text through the lens of structuralism. If you remember the very first lecture on this particular series of lectures, that is literary theory, we discussed that literary theory is nothing but it's a kind of lens which you have. It's, for example, you're wearing a sunglass, and the color, the tint of that sunglass makes you see the world in a different way, with a different color, right? So when we are doing structuralist literary theory, we will be studying that any particular text if we take through that lens. If we are, for example, talking about post-structuralism, we will be studying it through that particular lens. So here also the structuralists, they were talking about structures, they were talking about the particular language, signs, signifier and signified. Now the post-structuralists, as we said, they were questioning what the structuralists were doing. So although the structuralist movement fostered critical inquiry into these structures, it emphasized logical and scientific results. So if we study structuralism, we'll see that there is a particular way in which they proceed in identifying the structures, defining the relation between the structures, identifying and kind of relating the differences in sign system. So there is a way, a logic, a scientific approach to it. Many structuralists sought to integrate their work into pre-existing bodies of knowledge. So they tried to refer to the pre-existing bodies of knowledge. And this was observed in the work of Ferdinand de Saussure in linguistics, Claude Lévi-Strauss in anthropology, and many early 20th century psychologists. However, what are the post-structuralists doing? They are kind of questioning the assumptions which were there in structuralism. They derive, that is, their origin is from the structuralist premises. However, what they do is that they reject. What do they reject? The notion of essential quality of the dominant relation in the hierarchy, choosing rather to expose those relations and the dependency of the dominant term on its apparently subservient counterpart. So they were actually rejecting the essential quality of the dominant relation in the hierarchy. The hierarchy which is kind of existing or has been existing prior to post-structuralism. They were questioning this kind of hierarchy. They actually hold what? The study of underlying structures in itself culturally conditioned and therefore subject to myriad biases and misinterpretations. So they are highlighting what? They are highlighting the fact that what we think as normal, what we think as kind of given, there are actually various problems over there. They are kind of questioning the culturally conditioned. The word conditioned is very important because conditioned refers to the fact that how through various mechanisms, many things in and around us are made normal to us. And this being normal to the things around us, that is questioned by the post-structuralists. So to understand an object, one of the many meanings of a text, it is necessary to study both the object itself and the systems of knowledge which were coordinated to produce the object. So this is what the post-structuralists are saying. In this way, post-structuralism positions itself as a study of how knowledge is produced. So they are doing an in-depth study of how the idea of knowledge is produced, and they are actually questioning the conditioned truth which is there around us, and they are kind of questioning how we can kind of accept things as they are, because they are questioning the conditioned facts around us. Now, you can see a diagram before you related to synchronic and diachronic study. So post-structuralists generally assert that post-structuralism is historical and classifies structuralism as descriptive. Now this terminology relates to linguist Ferdinand de Saussure's distinction between views of historical, that is diachronic, and descriptive, that is synchronic theories of language. So what do we mean by this? Let us try and understand. Post-structuralist studies often reintroduce the historical element to analyze descriptive diachronic concepts. Here you can see synchronic is the study of language at a particular time. And what is diachronic? Diachronic is the study of the development of a language over time. So this is specific and this is over a periodic time. So diachronic is giving us a historical reference of that study, and synchronic is giving a descriptive or a particular study of a particular time, the study of language at a particular time. So this is termed as descriptive language linguistics or general linguistics. And when we are talking about diachronic, it is referring to comparative linguistics or historical linguistics, which is talking about a complete timeline. So post-structuralist studies often reintroduce the historical element to analyze descriptive diachronic concepts. The reintroduction of the historical element serves to destabilize the fixed meanings applied by structuralist categories. Michel Foucault's works such as Madness and Civilization, which examines the history and cultural attitudes about madness, is a good example of post-structuralist analysis. So the change which comes in post-structuralism is the inclusion of the historical element, and as a result of this, what happens is that it destabilizes something. What does it destabilize? It destabilizes the fixed meanings which were applied by the structuralist thinkers and structuralist critics or theorists. So they bring in the historical element, they talk about the synchronic and the diachronic, and they talk about the historical versus the descriptive view, in the mode of which they destabilize the fixed meanings which were applied by the earlier writers or the theorists. Now, the scholars which were there between the two, so the uncertain distance between structuralism and post-structuralism is further blurred by the fact that scholars generally do not label themselves as post-structuralists. It's usually we hear them or we hear their name in the form of what? As structuralists, not post-structuralists. In some cases, example, Claude Lévi-Strauss and Roland Barthes, scholars associated with structuralism became noteworthy in post-structuralism as well. Along with Lévi-Strauss, three of the most prominent post-structuralists were first counted among the so-called Gang of Four of structuralism par excellence: Jacques Lacan, Roland Barthes, and Michel Foucault. These four people. Now, the works of Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze, and Julia Kristeva are also counted as prominent examples of. One of the very important aspects which we were talking about when we were studying the Yogeshwar Patil is saying, is it recorded session, ma'am? No, it's a live session. So we are live right now. So as we were saying, that Barthes' concept of death of the author plays a very important role in the entire study of literary theory as such. So Barthes was originally a structuralist. So in the 1960s, he grew increasingly favorable to post-structuralist views. So we saw that the structuralists slowly got into the zone of post-structuralism. Now in 1968, Barthes published The Death of the Author in the American journal Aspen. And what happened? This particular, actually, this work, The Death of the Author, played a very important role. As I said, if you can actually read this particular, his views in The Death of the Author in this essay, because it might be available. If we have enough time, we can, take out a session and actually read this, because if you read it in original, it will give you even better understanding of what Barthes actually is trying to say in this essay. So the essay appeared in an anthology of his essay, Image, Music, Text, which is also included in From Work to Text. What did he do in it? In it, he declared a metaphorical event, that is the death of the author, as an authentic source of meaning for a given text. So what is he trying to say? He argued that a literary text has multiple meanings and that the author was not the prime source of the work's semantic content. If you remember in our previous lectures, when we were discussing the idea of practical criticism, or while we were studying new criticism, we said that, whenever, for example, all of you have done your masters and you are preparing for your net set and you are going to be future professors of English in the upcoming days, right? So usually if you are told that you go and teach a particular poem, what we do is that we start with what? We start with the very basic idea of who was the author, when was he writing, and analysis of the author, what he might have intended to say. So all these things usually we discuss in the introductory lecture. You will see that your textbooks also have these references when we are discussing a particular text, right? So that is usually the trend which we have whenever we are analyzing in the traditional criticism in the way we analyze a particular text. However, Barthes says that he kinds of brings in the idea of the death of the author, and he says that any literary text has multiple meanings, means there are many meanings, not just one meaning. And the author is not just the prime source of the work's semantic content. So what happens with the concept of death of the author? Barthes is actually relating to, or is pointing out to, the birth of the reader. So reader as the source of the proliferation of the meaning of the text. So it kind of gives us an analysis or reference to what? To the concept of reader's response criticism as well. Now we talk about Michel Foucault. So he also addresses the subject of the author in a critical interpretation in response to Barthes' death of the author theory. So in 1979 essay, What is an Author? He argues about this particular term of author function, which essentially fills that, or what some critics see as the void left by. What is void? Void is the gap which was left by Barthes' theory. What is Barthes' theory we are referring to? Barthes' theory of the death of the author. So the void or the gap which was left, that is actually kind of bridged by the idea which Foucault brings in. So Foucault's discourse analysis is a form of discourse analysis which focuses on power relationships in society as expressed through language and practices and based on the theories of Foucault. When we are talking about Foucault, the concept of discourse is very important. So I would ask all of you to understand the concept of discourse, read it, what is the idea. So whenever, for example, an individual tells you something, or anybody, kind of tries to bring about a change in the society or wants to publish some work of his, it becomes very difficult for that individual, if that individual is not from a section which belongs to the section who has some kind of power. So discourse is basically acceptance of something which is said as discourse based on the power equations which are existing in society. So Foucault actually gives you this entire idea of discourse and what can be termed as discourse, and as a result, he also refers to author function in his essay, What is an Author? right? So the idea of the author, death of the author, function of the author, this is kind of taken forward by Michel Foucault. Talking about Derrida, he stood up to read his paper entitled Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences in 1966 at Johns Hopkins University, USA. And in this paper, he argued that one attempts to analyze a structure, a universal center is assumed. That is, it is thought that a universal center is there, which guides that structure. But that center is not analyzed. And in order to analyze that center, another center would need to be assumed. Hence, it is believed in logocentrism, that is, a universal center doesn't exist. So the things which were kind of accepted in structuralism, as we said, are kind of questioned when we are talking about post-structuralism. Now, what does post mean? The post in post-structuralism is therefore not a final after in the sense of a hurdle now passed. Instead, post means with, but also different. Deconstruction is still structuralism, but opened up and transformed. So, deconstruction is also, again, when we say that it is actually deconstructing the structures which were earlier accepted as universal, right? So this transformation takes place through an undermining of structuralism's most fundamental claims. So these claims were actually questioned. What? Claims to absolute truths concerning the priority of speech over writing. So this is one example. So there were certain fundamental claims which were made by structuralism, which were later on questioned by the later post-structuralists. One of the important concepts is Derrida's concept of difference. It was introduced by Derrida as difference, that is basically difference and deferment together. So we are discussing the concept of difference, which is a kind of mixture of difference and deferment. So it's that attribute of the language by which meaning is generated because of a word's difference from other words in a signifying system. So first thing is difference from other words in a signifying system, and at the same time meaning is inevitably and infinitely deferred or postponed. So when we were talking about structuralism, we discussed about defer or postponement of meaning. So these two concepts are brought together in order to bring about the idea of what we are discussing as difference. That is, what is happening to meaning? True, there is difference. Along with difference, there is something else, and that something else is deferment. That is, the meaning is postponed. Since the meaning is postponed and also there is a difference, it is resulting in what is termed as difference. So, meaning is constantly under erasure and can be glimpsed only through aporias. What is aporia? Aporia is gap or deadlocks in understanding. So, the post-structuralists are saying that it is very, very difficult to understand meaning because meaning is constantly deferred, meaning is constantly getting postponed. You can also refer to Paul de Man, and here in mid-1960s, de Man befriended the French philosopher Derrida, with whom he developed deconstruction. Deconstruction, again, is very important. So at first, a form of literary analysis that aimed to show scenes exist. That is, some kind of, knots exist in all texts, and demonstrate that if examined in detail, all language actually contradicts itself, and its claims to meaning are slippery. So the idea that meaning is not very much there, it's not very apparent, rather it's slippery, and it's very difficult to actually identify and pinpoint meaning is what is stated by de Man and by Derrida, as we can see. So their approach soon gained influence in a wide range of other academic disciplines, including law, architecture, anthropology, and theology, and was taken up by feminists and other movements in which it was perceived as a means of what? Means of subverting oppressive social and political forces. So when this idea of subverting oppressive social and political forces come in, then the next series of theories which we are going to discuss, that is, post-colonialism, feminism. So these theories become important. So the idea of deconstruction is important for all the theories which are actually talking about subverting oppressive social and political forces. Then there is J.H. Miller, who was an American literary critic and scholar who advanced theories of literary deconstruction, which was kind of propounded by Derrida along with Mann. So he was part of Yale School along with Paul Mann and Jacques Derrida and Geoffrey Hartman, who advocated deconstruction as an analytical means by which the relationship between literary text and the associated meaning could be analyzed. Now, throughout his career, Miller was associated with Johns Hopkins University, Yale University, and the University of California, Irvine, and wrote over 50 books, kind of using what principles of deconstruction, and studied American and British literature. So he applied this concept or this idea of deconstruction on various works of American and British writers, including both prose and poetry. So this is what, in brief, we can talk about post-structuralism, wherein it is actually questioning the absolute principles which were given or put forth by the structuralists. So it is questioning the questions and the ideas which were put forward by the structuralists. Now, in continuation to that, we have the theory of postmodernism. Postmodernism is an intellectual stance or mode of discourse characterized by skepticism. Now, what is skepticism? You're actually questioning the things which are around you. And questioning what? Questioning the grand narratives. So that the way truth is related, the way truth is created, the narratives of that. So questioning the grand narratives of what? Of modernism. So postmodernism is now questioning the grand narratives of modernism. Rejection of epistemic certainty and the stability of meaning. So we can see its relation to post-structuralism, wherein it is also questioning the stability of meaning and sensitivity to the role of ideology in maintaining political power. So it is again questioning the stability of the idea of meaning, and it is mainly questioning the grand narratives which are put forth by whom? By the modernists. Now, claims of objectivity are dismissed as naive realism with attention drawn to the conditional nature of knowledge, claims within particular historical, political, and cultural discourses. So it is kind of talking about knowledge and how knowledge is not completely free from the way it is conditioned and put forth before the world. What is true to me or whatever truth is provided to me might not be the ultimate truth. So it is actually questioned, right? Now, the postmodern outlook is characterized by what? By self-referentiality, epistemological relativism, moral relativism, pluralism, irony, irreverence, and eclecticism. It rejects what? It rejects universal validity. Universal validity of what? Of binary oppositions, stable identity, hierarchy, and categorization. So this point is very important, which gives us an idea of what the postmodernists are doing. They are rejecting the universal validity of the binary oppositions which we were discussing when we were discussing structuralism. They were questioning the idea of stable identity, that how can we actually come across and state that this is the final identity of a person, because it is always evolving, it is always changing, meaning is always evolving, and hierarchy. So the hierarchy which was there in the concept of binary opposition, that is questioned, and categorization, the way we categorize different facts around us. Initially emerging from a mode of literary criticism, postmodernism developed in the mid-20th century as a rejection of modernism. So it was actually rejecting because it was questioning modernism and has been observed across many disciplines. Now, postmodernism is associated with the disciplines of deconstruction and poststructuralism because their way of investigation, their way of questioning things is actually kind of similar. As a result, it is associated. So, various authors have criticized postmodernism as promoting obscurantism, that is, you being obscure, abandoning enlightenment rationalism and scientific rigor, and adding nothing to empirical or analytical knowledge. Now, as it is for all the theories, it can never be absolute. There will always be questioning, there will always be criticism. And the main allegation against them was that they were making things very obscure because they were kind of questioning any absolute idea. So making things obscure or difficult to kind of find out meaning. And they were kind of, adding the analytical empirical knowledge. They were not adding much because they were questioning the absolute facts which were registered earlier, right? So this brings us to the next thinker, the theorist, that is Jacques Baudrillard. So his concept of simulacra and simulation. So in 1981, his philosophical treatise by him, he actually, what does he do is he seeks to examine the relationship between reality, symbols, and society. In particular, the significations and symbolism of culture and media involved in constructing an understanding of shared existence. So, what is simulacra? Simulacra are copies that depict things that either had no long and original, and what is simulation is the imitation of the operation of a real world process or system over time. So, simulacra can be something which has no original. For example, you can talk about the cartoon figures which we see, which are there in the various cartoon movies. They actually have no original, but they are a kind of copy of something which has no original, which is there before our eyes. And when we are saying simulation, then it is an imitation of things which are there around us. Anything which we see and there is an imitation and it is presented before us, then that can be termed as an example of simulation. So it's the imitation of the real world process or system over time, and simulacra is copy, again an imitation of something that has no original or the original is not existing anymore. So this concept was propounded by Baudrillard. Next, we will be discussing Julia Kristeva. Julia Kristeva, her ideas are also very, very significant. And in her theory, she synthesized, or when we are saying synthesized, it's basically bringing together elements from such dissimilar thinkers as the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and Russian literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin. So she actually, these ideas are actually brought together in her work. Now, two distinct trends characterize her writings. What? One, an early structuralist semiotic phase, and number two, the psychoanalytic and feminist phase. So right now, we are discussing Julia Kristeva with reference to this particular phase, the first phase, wherein she is working as a structuralist semiotic critic. And the later phase we will be discussing about her when we discuss feminism, wherein she comes across as a psychoanalytic feminist. Now, during the later period, Kristeva created a new study she called semianalysis, a combination of psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud and semiology or semiotics, that is the study of science of Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure and American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce. Her most important contribution to the philology or philosophy of language was a distinction between the semiotic and symbolic aspects of language. What is the semiotic? Which is manifested in rhythm and tone, is associated with the maternal body, What is the symbolic? The symbolic, on the other hand, corresponds to the grammar and syntax, which is associated with referential meaning. So she differentiates between the semiotic and the symbolic aspects of language. By semiotic, she is referring to the rhythm and tone which is there, and by symbolic, she is referring to the grammar and syntax which is there in the text. So with this distinction, Kristeva attempted to bring the speaking body back into the linguistics and philosophy. She proposed that bodily drives are discharged in language and that structure of language is already operating in the body. So Kristeva's contribution is that she brings in the idea of body and the concept of semiotic and symbolic and the distinction between them, and bringing in or kind of merging the ideas of psychoanalysis and semiology or semiotic, which is semiotics referring to study of science, and combining them with psychoanalysis, which is referring to the mind. So she actually brings together the mind and the idea of the science. Now, when we talk about Lyotard is kind of characterized by persistent opposition to universals, meta-narratives, and generality. So Lyotard questions and opposes the universals, that is the meta-narratives which define history, define things which are there before us, and generality. He is fiercely critical of many of the universalist claims of enlightenment, and several of his works serve to undermine the fundamental principles that generate these broad claims. So in the mode of the post-structuralists and postmodernists, Lyotard is questioning the universality and the meta-narratives and the general the ideas which are considered as universal, and is questioning their universality. So in his writings of the early 1970s, he rejects what he regards as theological underpinnings of both Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. So in his writings, he is rejecting these theological underpinnings and the references. His interdisciplinary discourse spans such topics as epistemology, communication, human body, modern art, postmodern art, literature, critical theory, music, film, time, memory, space, the city, the landscape, the sublime, and relation between aesthetics and politics. So he brings in all these references. There's also reference to Frederic Jameson, who was American literary critic, philosopher, and Marxist political theorist. He's best known for his analysis of contemporary cultural trends, particularly his analysis of postmodernity and capitalism. These are certain of his books which you can keep in mind, as we said that whenever we are having questions in literary theory, we can have it from the names of the different theorists. We can have it in reference to the books which have been written by a particular kind of theorist, the date of publication, the kind of, the sequence which is followed in order to discuss that particular theory, or to discuss or the order in which those books were published, right? So that is how we are going to discuss the different theories. Now we are coming across, or we are moving on to the next theory, which is psychoanalytic criticism. And we got reference of it when we were talking about Julia Kristeva some time back, wherein she also contributed to this aspect of theory. And psychoanalysis, as you can see or understand from the name, it talks about the human mind and the way it works. So psychoanalytic literary criticism is a literary criticism or literary theory which in method, concept or form is influenced by the tradition of psychoanalysis which was begun by Sigmund Freud. So who began this idea of psychoanalytic criticism? Sigmund Freud. So with Freud's concept, actually psychoanalytic criticism began. So psychoanalytic reading has been practiced since the early development of psychoanalysis itself and has developed into a heterogeneous interpretive tradition. So what is the current position? The current position, it is heterogeneous, means there are different kind of layers to it. It is not, just homogeneous. That is, this is not only of one color. There are different colors to it. There are different shades to it. Heterogeneous interpretive, so it helps us interpret interpretive tradition. So these are the qualities which have come into the idea of psychoanalysis. It adopts the methods of reading employed by Freud and later theorists to interpret texts. So we have already got that the origin is in Freud. However, there are later theorists also whose ideas have been employed in order to interpret the texts in the psychoanalytic criticism. What does it argue? So it argues that literary texts, like dreams, express the secret unconscious desires and anxieties of the author, and that a literary work is a manifestation of the author's own neurosis. So it is actually bringing in the idea that literary text is just like a dream. So all of us have dreams, right? For example, if we have our examination next week, then what happens? Our dreams are usually aligned to our examination. So we will be dreaming that today the question paper was very difficult. I could not finish my question paper on time, or you will kind of dream that I have completed my question paper on time and I was kind of very successful in completing it on time. So somebody is congratulating me, the whole class is clapping for me. Or else what happens usually, when we are in fear, we see that we could not finish the question paper on time, we could not understand the question paper, and then we are crying, we are in a difficult situation. So our dreams are aligned to our thoughts, which are the incidents or the things which are happening around us right now. So this is how the dreams are actually kind of aligned to what is around us. And psychoanalytic criticism is stating that literary texts, like the dreams, so what we saw, that dreams actually kind of give opening to our secret unconscious desires, which perhaps we are not aware right now, but it's somewhere down the line kind of coming to our existence through our dream. So the dream is equated with literary texts, and it's stated that literary texts also express the secret unconscious desires and anxieties of the author, and that a literary work is a manifestation of the author's own neurosis. So one may psychoanalyze a particular character within a literary work, but it is usually assumed that such characters are projections of the author's psyche. So the mind or the psychology of the author is brought into study through psychoanalytic criticism, and according to them, the work which is there before our eyes has got some elements of the way the mind is working of that particular author. So a reflection of that can be seen in the literary texts. Sigmund Freud initiated or lay the foundation stone of this particular theory. So Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of personality argues that human behavior is the result of the interactions among three component paths of the mind. So what components are they? Components of the mind. And what are the three components of the mind? The id, the ego, and the superego. So dear students, please pay attention to these details, that the mind is kind of consisting of these ideas, that is the id, ego, and superego. The structural theory of personality places great importance on how conflicts among the parts of mind shape behavior and personality. These conflicts are mostly unconscious. For example, you have an ice cream in in the fridge, and you want to have that ice cream, right? So when you want to have that ice cream, what happens? You first think that, okay, so I will have that. The next moment you have the idea that no, if I have my ice cream, I might have affect by tonsillitis. I might have catch cold and cough, and so I should not have too much of ice cream. And then you think that, okay, fine, I will not have my ice cream. So when we are saying id, it is actually the immoral aspect of our mind which is saying that yes, I want that ice cream. I want that ice cream. Though that ice cream is not something healthy, it is not actually a fruit which you are having which is going to be healthy for you, but it's an ice cream which is comes under the junk food, and which is, again, if taken directly, it might cause some harm to us through, if we might catch cough and cold. So the id, even knowing that, is telling us, our mind, that we will go and have the ice cream. What is the ego doing? The ego is kind of stating, or kind of giving us a moral kind of thing that, okay, if you are having it, then you should have little quantity of it, or once it is not very cold, you can have it during that time. And then finally, the superego, which is again it kind of it is also kind of balancing, and it is giving us the positive aspect that you should not have so much of ice cream, you should reduce it. So finally the ego is developed, which is the balanced aspect, and it says, gives you the final decision that yes, even if you're having it, you should have it in a very less quantity, or you should kind of wait till it melts, and then you should have. So the id is the immoral aspect of the mind. The superego, it is the moral aspect of your mind. And finally, what is happening? The balance is created by the ego. So this is exactly what is there in this point, wherein it is saying that there are different quality kind of conflicts in our mind, and these conflicts actually reconfigure our behavior and our personality. Now he says, Freud says that personality develops during childhood and is critically shaped through a series of 5 psychosexual stages, and it is actually referring to his theory of development. During each stage, a child is presented with a conflict between biological drives and social expectations. Successful navigation of these internal conflicts will lead to mastery of each developmental stage and ultimately fully mature personality. So we see that Freud is actually talking about the way in which the personality of an individual is developed. And he says, or he tries to state that when the writer is writing, there is a kind of reference to these ideas, and we kind of get an analysis of it when we will be studying this particular theory ahead. We will get to know or understand this theory even better. Since we are about time today, our lecture is from 3 to 4, we will be stopping here today with our understanding of Freud's concept. And tomorrow's lecture, we will take up Sigmund Freud's models of the mind and discuss this theory further in details. So I'm stopping the sharing right now. So we discussed structuralism, we discussed post-structuralism, we discussed postmodernism, and now we are discussing psychoanalytic criticism, psychoanalysis, the idea of human mind, and how literary theory is analyzed through it. We will take this discussion further in tomorrow's lecture. We'll discuss the theory further in details and take up few other theories which are lined up after this, right? So thank you, all of you, for joining in. The literary theories, as we discussed, they are not very easy, but if we kind of try and understand the main ideas of it, names of the books, authors, and when it was published, what is the main idea, I think it will kind of help us in going ahead. I see a few students who have kind of been online. So hello to all of you. If you have any questions, you can post it here. And after the session is over, you can connect with me on my channel for further details. We will also meet tomorrow. So as the session is there, as it is announced, so be on kind of updated about it. Stay with me. See you all tomorrow. Have a great day. So I'm signing off now. Thank you for joining in. Thanks a lot.